Dans un monde de design et de l'architecture, la liste AD est la plus renommée. Elle entre maintenant dans sa 4e décennie. Chaque année, Architectural Digest AD désigne les top 100 architectes intérieurs que vous devez connaître. Elliott Barnes fait partie de la sélection France et États Unis. En 1987, Elliott Barnes rencontre Andrée Putman qui lui confie la direction de son agence. Ensuite, en 2003, l'architecte s'installe à son compte. Je suis Bettina Frolich et j'ai eu la possibilité de concevoir des pages tendances et des reportages sur la décoration tout au long de ma carrière. Aujourd'hui, j'ai le plaisir d'accueillir Elliott Barnes pour une interview qui durera 30 minutes. Il dévoile l'importance de l'histoire dans l'architecture, ses projets de rêve et surtout pourquoi il considère que les crayons est toujours l'ultime moyen d'expression pour un architecte dans un monde digital à outrance. La conversation se déroulera en anglais et sous-titrée en français. Découvrez également comment il choisit les artisans d'art pour ses projets d'envergure. À tout de suite. I would say the most important souvenir that you have from her still. So
what is
from
the
Andrée
most
Putman.
important?
Yeah.
What is
Souvenir
the
that
most
you have from
important
her. What
souvenir
is
remembrance? I mean, there are so many. There are just so many, because when you spend 17 years working really side by side with someone, as I had the chance to do, as I was lucky enough to be able to do, there's so many things that influence you that come to mind. I think in a general sense, one of the most memorable points is really her attitude, and the attitude is to be in a state of constant research, constant discovery, being constantly open to things that you might not even have imagined that you could do or would think to do. So she was almost without frontiers in a certain sense. She was very curious about everything, and I think that rang true to me in many ways, and it's a trait that I find similar in other artists that I admire, artists that continually change, like, for example, Miles Davis, who throughout his entire career was continually changing, for example, or you take a Pablo Picasso, who throughout his entire career was always changing the way he painted. So that the way Andrée approached interior design and her creative aspect was always about never repeating oneself. And there was a way to do things. There was always a certain vocabulary. There's a certain entre guillemets style, although she hated that word. But there was a certain way that one did things, right? But she didn't really want to. It was always be different, and continue to search and do different things.
That's also what I've seen. So when I see your realization, so if it's private apartments, private villas, retail, or hotel, spa, and all that, so there is always, I would say, your special style. You will see it, and also there's such a signature. How do you think? How do you detail, or how do you define your signature today of your realizations?
Today,
Today,
right now,
right
right
now,
now.
right now, or tomorrow, or whenever you want.
Oh my goodness. I would think in a general sense, it's a sort of textured minimalism, and I believe that's a generality. Let's say, so to define that, what does that really mean when we say that? And so the textured part comes with the use of materials and using materials and details to articulate certain ideas about how things come together, certain ideas about how one makes and uses natural light, texture has to come in with oppositions of smooth and rough, and these kind of working in contrasts. And then, of course, I think the minimalist side, which is now kind of, it's almost banal to say minimalism, but it's the way to take away everything that's not necessary and just use the strict minimum. And I think that is that's how I would define it in a very general sense. Now, the question is, how does that then get applied to the different projects that you've seen? So if we're doing, for example, as we did for Rencontre, how does that textured minimalism, get applied? And if we're doing a private gallery house, or if we're doing another sort of private space, how does that get applied? And within this notion of textured minimalism, it gives one enough freedom to follow different paths that might be particular to that one project, by still then bringing in this idea of materials and details to express an idea. In the case of Rencontre, there was the wine paper that we invented, which really took grape leaves after their first pressing and mixed them with hemp and linen to make a paper that was really about the whole champagne world, because hemp was used by Dom Pérignon to hold the corks in the bottles back in 1726, 1727. And then at the same time, articulating all of this in a very strict way, where you only do what is necessary that needs to be done. So not to do things that are superfluous. And by not doing things that are superfluous, then you give space to the textures and the finishes and the materials to then breathe and express themselves.
Mm-hmm. I have also seen that you especially that you are using always really fine arts and materials. They are really absolutely amazing. So that it takes part of the approach in innovation and luxury that you want to express during your interiors?
Not necessarily. It's not because you use gold leaf in a room that it's luxurious or nice. There's nothing to do with it, anything really. I think I would use gold leaf in a room because it allowed me to express a certain idea or connect the project to people using it. It allows me to sort of create a certain narrative for that I do quite often in a project. And luxury is a very that's probably a whole nother discussion. Luxury is well, it's complicated. Luxury has a lot to do with things that are very hard to get a hold of, and has to do with things that are not perhaps even appreciated by a lot of people. It's not also because you have a beautiful piece of art that you put it in a room that the room works, right? A room works, and then the art works with the room, and the room works with the art. It's a sort of dialogue back and forth. So you can actually, it is possible to walk down the street and find an old piece of wood that speaks to you and says something to you that then says something about the project, and you put that in a room and it works, right? That's possible. And I think what I find really interesting and important is to build spaces that would allow that to happen, should that be the case. Whereas if you were to take, a very nice photo by, I don't know, it could be anyone for that matter, and you put it in the room, it just might not work, right? So it's not because you have these amazingly beautiful, precious things that you put it in the room and it works. So I think it's always important to understand what the project is trying to say, because every project has a voice, And in a way, it's my job to give that voice space. And in giving that voice space, the voice will then tell me what's appropriate or not appropriate for the space.
Mhm. Really nice. One other question is the invisible collection. Could you explain it a little bit to our readers that they understand, or to the audience in general, that they understand what this means for you?
Well, the invisible collection is actually, it's a brilliant idea. And when I met with Anna Zawi and Isabelle Dubern, who were the founders of that very nice company, their idea was to create a collection of work that was only present in built works by interior designers and decorators and architects. That is to say, if you would do a room and you would do the table in the room, they would take that table to make it part of their collection. And the idea of it being visible is that it was not meant to be a collection or a part of a collection at the start. It was meant to participate in a much larger idea, in a much broader scope in a project. And so what happened, what that allowed the designer to do was to create this sort of collection of different pieces from different projects and bring them all together under that designer's name. Then Anna and Isabel brought that entire thing together under the Invisible Collection brand. And then since then they've branched out, but I think that the core of their approach is incredibly unique and seductive, and I really like them for that.
And you live in different spaces, and also Paris is for you probably a city which is important for you. Is that also an important inspiration, the city, or is it only the space you have to transform in something special?
Well, Paris. Paris is very personal for me, and I'm from Los Angeles originally, and I knew very early on that I would live in Paris. I didn't understand when I was that young that I would live in Paris for more than half my life. I am an urbanist, and I like cities. I like this. I like city spaces. I like the feeling of this built environment, and I feel quite at home in many different cities of the world. And I think the energy of the city clearly influences what I do. At one level, for example, is in terms of context. So if you're building in a city, there's a built environment that you can dialogue with in a project. If you take that then from the urban level or the architectural level down to the interior design level, when you are renovating a space and working in someone's house that's already a built environment, you immediately establish a dialogue with the context of that house, and it's that dialogue that I mentioned before about a voice. It's about listening to the voice of the place, and getting in some sort of relationship with that, and based upon that, then building something new.
And is it still, I will say, you take part of the 100 best interior designers chosen by AD? Is it still what is really helpful and important for an interior designer today? What means that for you?
Well, I mean, it's like winning an Oscar, really, or in France, it's like winning a César. It's a recognition by respected professionals that what you're doing has left some kind of mark, or has influenced someone someplace, or a few people someplace. but the AD, I mean, and it's an honor because of that, right? Because it's a very huge market, and there are a lot of people out there, and to be part of that selected few is obviously a tremendous pleasure and a tremendous honor. But as I always say, the fight goes on, and once the announcement has been made, 20 minutes later, it starts over again, right? The task starts over again, and it makes it harder because you have to, now that you've been given this wonderful accolade, you have to live up to that, and so it gets harder. It gets harder, and and that's fine, because I love that challenge, and I love testing myself and being pushed, and it goes back to what I was saying with Andrée at the start, just never really accepting where you are, but always pushing to discover things. So thank you, AD USA, and thank you, AD France, for having nominated me, because it just inspires me to push harder and go further.
Especially your inspiration, it comes from what?
Depends on the day.
Depends on the day.
Depends on the day. No, it does. It depends on the day. It depends on the project. And I think I think that's an important ambivalency to have, in a way, because if you come with, I'm influenced by everything. So I'm influenced by jazz. I'm influenced by art. I'm influenced by boats. I'm influenced by a lot of different things. But if you limit your influence to that and say that I'm influenced by ABC, when you come to a project, that's what you're bringing to the project. But if you come to a project in a sense naked, and in a sense open to whatever the project is going to present to you, and based upon what the project presents to you, then you look for influences and sources. What you begin to do is you begin to craft a solution or a response that is particular to that precise moment and that precise work. So what's important is to develop what the French called a regard, a certain look, that seeks influences in a multitude and a wide range of sources. And that could be how to make champagne. It could be fast cars. It could be jazz. Right now, I'm really big on ecclesiastical music, and I'm listening to this guy, Harry Christopher the 16th, and I've been listening to that day in and day out for the last 4 days, because that's where I am now. I also love looking at contemporary art, and I also love looking at furniture, and I also love looking at the sea, and so I love looking at a lot of different things. And I think once you sort of have all that stuff, then you don't need to sort of say I'm influenced by this, right? Because then it's the project that influences you, and that's where the connection happens, right? Because the project then speaks to you.
And what is your dream project that you haven't realized yet, or what do you
Just the next project.
Just the next one?
Every project is a dream project, because every project allows me to dream. So there's not one type of project. I'm interested in doing many things. I'm interested in doing hotels and tasting centers around champagne and wine, and I would love to do a boat, but at the same time I'd love to do a plane. At the same time, it will be really great. I'm designing a cigar box for a company out of Dubai. So the dream project is the next project, and I think and that's enough for me.
And how do you choose, for example, the craftsman who you are working with?
It's a very complicated procedure, and there first has to be I think there has to be a mutual respect, and then there has to be a connection, and then once there is the connection, there has to be a trust to be able to let go. So this is very curious, because forcibly the discipline that I'm in and the way that I choose to express myself, details are important. So we're what I would say a control freak in a certain sense. You know, I'm very much a control freak. You want to control all the little details, and the most miraculous thing to do is that if you're able to find an artisan and a craftsman who understands what you've done, maybe who you are and where you want to go, and understands the project, and then is able to communicate ideas back to you, that then you can let go because there's that trust. And I work with a guy whose name is Pierre-Yves Lefloc, who does leather work for me. And this is this special relationship that I have with Pierre-Yves. And he's the Meilleur Ouvrier de France, and he does work for some of the top name fashion houses for all of their leather goods. And he's really a master of his trade. And I can do a drawing, and then he will come back to me and say, and then this. And then at that point, we just say, do it. And I know that his level of, the French say, exigence, is sort of self-demanding, is as high, if not higher than mine. And that's where we connect. And then there's total trust. So it's a tough process, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay. There's some craftsmen that need you to tell them all the way, and there are others that don't. So it's a feeling, and it has to feel right. You know, I mean, you have to appreciate what someone does, appreciate their expertise, their knowledge, their experience, and be able to trust that. And if that feels good and it feels right in your heart, then that's the requirement. And if it doesn't, then that's okay, and you should do something else.
When did you realize first that you are done, or this is your special talent to do interior? You realized that?
Well, there was never one moment, but I realized rather late that many things in my life had oriented me towards what I'm doing now. So when I was quite young, you know, like a lot of kids, I was fortunate enough to have my mother send me to art school in Los Angeles, and then sometime later so I was always drawing, and then later on I started designing boats and furniture, and so I was doing a lot of furniture design just at home by myself, always elevations in a way. And I was drawing lots of boats because I really love sailing. I still love sailing, and I thought I was going to be a naval architect and design America's Cup racing boats. And then through talking to my dad and talking to some other people, I thought, well, maybe this architecture thing is kind of interesting. So I thought about that for a while, and I started looking at that. And then I ended up doing that, and I ended up taking architecture courses and going to Cornell University and getting an architecture degree and a degree in urban design. And then I went back to California and started working for an architect, Arthur Erickson. And I was quite young, and I thought, wow, I've been working here for now a year, and I've never seen anything built, and this just takes so long, this architecture thing, And I was kind of, I don't know, not disenchanted, but I thought, wow, this takes a long time. And at that point, I knew that I really wanted to change my life and come to France. And I knew that when I did that, I wanted to come to Paris. And I knew that I wanted to work for Andrée Putman. And so I did that. And when I started working with Andrée, I discovered this whole interior design world. So I didn't really know about this interior design world really until I was working with her. And at that moment, I began to realize that it felt right, and that all of the things that I had learned about how to make buildings in architecture school, and all the things that I'd done about designing boats, and all the things that I'd been done as a kid designing furniture, all kind of came together into what we were doing at a cart, and it made sense. and I let architecture go, and I never looked back, and I have no regrets, because the architecture training that I received at Cornell has fundamentally formed the way I think about space and interior design. I mean, fundamentally constructed my outlook. So being an architect set me up to become an interior designer in a sense. It's kind of a roundabout way, but
Really, really interesting.
yeah. Mm. So I first started teaching when I was a grad student at Cornell. I was a teacher's assistant. So there was a professor who would be head of a year, and he had three or four grad students helping him run the four different studios that he was in charge of. So each grad student was in charge of 15 very young kids, and it started there, and it has nothing to do with career. It has a lot to do with personal development. It has a lot to do with one, being able to explain an idea that you have to someone. It's important at the second level to be able to listen to the ideas of someone. And the third thing that took me a little bit of time to understand, but then now it's also very much part of what I do, is that you have to give the person the space in which to express themselves. So even if I'm their teacher, their instructor at INSET, as the case may be, and there I'm bringing in a very American sort of academic culture to a very French academic cultural environment. So there's obviously a meeting point there. Um, and my architectural references obviously were different from the kids' architectural references, because we were coming from two different places, which is fine. And it's important to uh, also let go and know that you're there to help the student express their ideas. You're not there for the student to express your ideas. So you have to be able to put yourself in a certain position, which is that of providing information that the student may or may not get. And if they get it, that's wonderful. And if they don't get it, well, that's okay. They'll probably get it a little bit later, maybe. So, from a personal development point of view, which then obviously I guess spins off into a career development point of view, teaching teaches you humility. As you know, as I think that's what it's about. It's about humility. And you might have all the different accolades that you have in the world, but you're not there to crush a young mind. You're there to support a young mind and to give a young mind a sort of springboard to go even further. And that means that you might have to not talk about your own ideas and really talk about their ideas. So it's kind of like raising a child in a way, I mean, yet it's I don't know, a lot of it's kind of like that in a sense, in some ways.
And when you work with a new client, so there's somebody who is coming and say, okay, Elliott, I've seen what you've done, and I really want to that you realize my next project. Um, what is the word which, or what is the word, or what is the most important thing for you, that you understand 100% what your client want and need?
um, it's impossible. I think it would be very presumptuous to say that you understand 100% of what your client wants and needs at the first meeting. I think that's impossible. I think it is entirely possible to meet a client and put yourself in a position to say, I'm here to over this process of a project, which can go from 1 year to 3 years and sometimes more. I'm here to listen to you and, based upon my experience, provide you with the best advice I can to realize this project that you would like to do. And over the course of a project, you discover who the client is. And at some point, you discover certain things which allows you to make certain decisions. But I think one should never be presumptuous to say, "Oh, I know what this person needs," because that's, I think, if you do that, I think you're setting yourself up for kind of a big awakening, and perhaps not one that's very pleasant at some point. I think the most important thing to do is to be open and to listen to a client, and to not be afraid to tell a client, "I don't know." It's okay to not know. It's not okay to not to try and find out. So I've told clients, they'll say, "What do you think about this?" And I'll tell them, "I don't know." And I don't, but I'll think about it, and I will inform myself, and I will come back to you, and I will tell you then what I think. And I think, again, it's about this idea of humility and sincerity, and understanding that the process, the process is not about me. I'm always very flattered when clients come to me and say, "Oh, yeah, Elliott, we like what you do. Will you please do something for us?" And the answer is yes, because I find that I'm flattered that I've been able to connect with them at that level. But I also told them that, what you saw in the other projects is not what I'm going to do for you. What I'm going to do for you is something that will be really about you. And our working together will be a witness to, or manifestation of, this discovery of who you are, and who your family is, and who I am, and who we are as a team working together. So I think, and I also say to clients quite often that, this project is not about me. It's about them, really. And I am this sort of instrument that allows them to take this idea that they have about what a space might be, or even a more complex idea about what a home might be. And I'm this instrument that allows them to realize that. Right? And so at the end of the day, what's important is for someone to walk into a client's house and say to the client, "Wow, this house, Catherine, looks so much like you. I can really feel you in that house." That's important. It's kind of a pity, I think, if someone walks into the house and says, "Wow, this is a great Elliott Barnes project," or "This is," I think that's unfortunate, because then I haven't been able to capture the character of Catherine, right? And that's what's important.
Elliott, it was a pleasure to meeting you, and also to speak with you about all your projects, about your ideas and your inspirations. Do you want to add something special what we haven't discussed yet?
We haven't discussed. In closing, we haven't discussed the importance of history today in interior design and in architecture. And I say this because this is my how do you say, this is my banner of the moment. This is my thing. And what I say to all designers is that, well, two things. One is it's really important to open books and look at how things were done, not 5 years ago, but 500 years ago, and to understand in interior design why designers were making, in the 1700s, a certain detail in a certain way, and to understand the language of details, and to understand the history and the theory of interior design, because that influences how we make spaces. And the other thing that I would say is that all designers should never get the pencil. Don't forget the pencil, because in a world where everything is built around the computer today, what we do is that we draw, and we communicate ideas through what we draw.
Oh, I love that. So thank you very much, Elliott, for taking the time to answering. all the questions.
Thank you, Bettina.
And I hope really, I love what you do, and I hope that we will have a discussion on another day and in another year, and you will still find something new to express yourself and we will
Thank you
see
very much.
something absolutely more special than you did it. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Evening. Bye bye.
You too. Stay well. Speak soon. Bye bye.
You too. Bye bye.